Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says US-brokered peace talks with Russia will resume this Wednesday in Abu Dhabi. Meanwhile, Russian drone attacks are wreaking havoc on Ukraine. Authorities in the country's center and southeast say Russian strikes have killed at least 17 people this weekend. And in the city of Zaporizhzhia, a maternity hospital was targeted by drones.
Nobody was killed, but authorities say several people were injured when Russian strike drones hit this maternity hospital in the city of Zaporizhzhia in southeastern Ukraine. Authorities say 2 women were undergoing medical exams when the attack happened Sunday afternoon in broad daylight. Pregnant women were quickly moved to the basement for shelter, including 31-year-old Eliot A, who says she saw the drone from the window of her room before it hit.
At that moment, I was lying on the bed. I heard a buzzing sound, looked out the window and saw it starting to descend directly onto the maternity ward. I shouted to the whole ward and we ran out because it was flying towards us. As soon as we reached the corridor, there was an explosion.
As well as causing injuries, the blast damaged essential medical equipment. The hospital's gynecology department bore the brunt of Sunday's strike, one of many Russian attacks across Ukraine. Svetlana Ivachenko has worked at the hospital for 25 years.
It hurts me a lot because I grew up in this institution. I gave birth to my daughter here. That's it.
In a separate attack, a Russian drone hit a bus in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, killing 15 mine workers on board. The strikes come just days after U.S. President Trump said the Kremlin had agreed to stop bombing Ukraine because of the extreme cold.
And I personally asked President Putin not to fire into Kiev and the various towns for a week. And he agreed to do that, and I have to tell you, it was very nice.
In interview on Czech radio, Ukraine's president says he remains open to negotiations with Russia and the United States, but Volodymyr Zelenskyy insists Europe must be present at key stages of the process.
The last mile is always very difficult, and we don't know whether we're very close to a result or not very close. It's difficult to say.
A second round of U.S.-backed trilateral peace talks aimed at ending Russia's war on Ukraine is set to start this Wednesday in Abu Dhabi.
Eliot Cohen is an American political scientist and served in the U.S. State Department during the administration of President George W. Bush. It's good to have you with us, Eliot. Russia is continuing its strikes on Ukraine despite having agreed to peace talks. So what's the tactic here?
Well, I think for the Russians, they're doing what they've always done. I mean, this has been a remarkably unsuccessful war from their point of view. Their rate of advance is less than that of the Allies at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. They've taken terrible casualties. So all they can do is they can hit Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, and they can continue these extremely costly attacks on the Ukrainian front line. It's not clear, I think, one doesn't know unless one is in the room, but it's not clear that the Russians actually think that there's a peace deal to be had. I think Vladimir Putin has been very clear that he will not accept the presence of Western forces in Ukraine, that he won't accept Western security guarantees, particularly American security guarantees to Ukraine, that he views the Ukrainian government as illegitimate. And I think the most dangerous thing here is that I think he thinks he's winning the war. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians have, I believe, shifted somewhat. They understand that they will not be able to take back the currently occupied territories at the moment by force. But on the other hand, they're not willing to, really submit themselves to Russian control. So what I think that is really going on here is both sides are negotiating. Part of what they're doing, the main thing that they're trying to do is to keep the Americans and above all Donald Trump on side.
Right. As these talks go on, do you expect Europe to be involved at some point?
Well, Europe is involved behind the scenes. I think, it's a critical question. Will you have European troops stationed in Ukraine? Will you have Europeans continuing to fund not only a large part of the civilian budget of Ukraine, but above all, its acquisition of military hardware? I have to say that I think, on the whole, the European leaders, by and large, have played this pretty well in that they've managed to keep the American relationship with Ukraine intact. They've been able to continue to get supplies, particularly military supplies, to the Ukrainians. And I think there has been a kind of a European consensus that this war cannot end with Ukraine really being subjugated to Russia. And that's very, very important. So they're playing an important role, but they're playing it behind the scenes.
Right. And what about Washington? What role is being played by the U.S. in this?
Well, look, everything does come down, unfortunately, to the personality of Donald Trump. And he's a very mercurial leader, and his views change. But I think on the whole, you can say a couple of things. First, he personally does not particularly like Zelenskyy, but it is not the case that he simply wants to sell Ukraine to the Russians. I think a number of commentators say that, and I don't think they're right. I think he does have some kind of regard for Putin, but on the whole, I think that relationship has deteriorated. In general, I think he thinks Putin got his country into an incredibly stupid and costly war, which has set Russia back, which is, of course, entirely true. And more to the point, I think there have now been a number of occasions where the Russians have made promises to him that they didn't fulfill. And so I think he's more wary of them. And I guess the most important thing in all this is, as ever with Donald Trump, the issue is his ego. I think he very much wants to go down in history as the great peacemaker. He sort of believes he already is that. He believes he's earned the Nobel Peace Prize many times over. I think he knows that this is the really big war that he would like to bring to an end. So I think in that sense, there's a certain kind of sincerity in terms of wanting to at least bring about a ceasefire. That doesn't necessarily mean, however, that that's what he's going to be able to deliver.
All right. Okay. Political scientist Eliot Cohen, we appreciate your thoughts on this. Thank you for speaking to us.
You're very welcome.
Well, for some analysis now, we're joined by Michael Kimmage, director of the Kennan Institute. That's a US think tank focusing on post-Soviet countries. Great to have you on DW News today. Michael, Russia is still carrying out strikes on Ukraine. So what's Moscow's aim at the peace talks in Abu Dhabi?
I would say that Russia's aim is largely what it was, or seems to be what it was from the beginning of the war, which is some substantial control over Ukrainian politics in terms of the entire country. And some effort to rewrite the security rules of the region, which is to say very ambitious efforts that match the force that Russia is using, but I suspect are incompatible with U.S. and European aspirations.
Now, Ukraine's energy infrastructure is under severe strain as a result of Russia's attacks. How does this affect their position then in these talks?
It weakens the position. Ukraine is not where it was a year ago, either in terms of territory. Russia has been marginally expanding its control over Ukrainian territory, and the energy crisis is new. Life had been much more normal in Kiev a year ago, and that, of course, puts Ukraine in a worse position at the negotiating table, but not in such a position, I think, that's going to compel immediate or long-term compromises from Ukraine.
All right. Do they have any leverage, though, in any way?
Well, the leverage is the 80% of territory that Ukraine controls. The leverage is a strengthening security relationship with Europe. And the leverage is a Europe that's investing much more in defense in ways that are going to benefit Ukraine over the long term. So Ukraine's position is difficult, but it's certainly not desperate.
What's Washington's role here? Donald Trump asked Russia to temporarily halt attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
Well, Washington has been trying to mediate. President Trump on the campaign trail declared himself a peacemaker in this situation, but Washington's role is difficult to assess because what Washington does not have is a clear agenda on which Ukraine, Europe, Russia, and the United States could agree. And so you get these statements about wanting to resolve the war, and certainly President Trump has pushed people to the negotiating table, Ukrainians and Russians, which I suppose is an achievement, but there's no sense of a shared agenda or a clear path forward. So I suspect, Washington is going to be as, sort of luckless in these negotiations as it's been over the last 12 months.
How hopeful are you that a solution can be reached soon between Russia and Ukraine?
I am not hopeful at all. I think that Ukraine and Russia can perhaps minimize certain, coercive tools that they have. So, Russia and Ukraine may trade agreements on striking different parts of critical infrastructure. Ukraine has been striking oil refineries in Russia over the last several months. But beyond that, a kind of big structural solution to the problem, I don't see that happening. I think what Russia is demanding is going to be unacceptable to Ukraine. And as I've mentioned already, Ukraine is not in a position where it has to yield, surrender, or capitulate. So I think agreements perhaps on the margins, but the war, I suspect, and fear will continue to go on.
What would give you hope? What needs to fundamentally change then for you to perhaps have a different opinion on the matter?
Looking at it from Ukraine's point of view, which I think is largely Europe's point of view as well, and Washington is a wild card, I think what Ukraine needs is for Russia to change its position, to give up on this project of trying to control Ukraine, east, west, north, south, and including the capital city. And when I think Ukraine sees evidence of that Russia is not in the position and no longer eager to control the country, then perhaps Ukraine can consider certain forms of compromise, negotiation, diplomacy. Absent that, to put the question very simply, Ukraine has to match Russia's force with a force of its own. And I think if you look at most European capitals, really the vast majority, there's an agreement that Ukraine should not yield or capitulate now. That's the view in Berlin, it's the view in Brussels, it's the view in Paris, it's the view in London, and that, of course, puts wind in Ukraine's sails.
All right. We're going to have to leave it there, Michael, but great to get your analysis today. Michael Kimmage, Director of the Kennan Institute, joining us today from Washington, D.C. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.